put my Nokia. I think you just press that and it goes off. Anyway, there. So look, what I wanted to do was focus on my mother, Helen Hooker, but obviously my father, Ernie O'Malley, will come into it and give you a little bit of background from mother. Maybe I can stand here and read. So, my mother is an American. She was born in Greenwich, Connecticut. She meets my father in America. This is the short version. Meets my father in America. Comes over to Ireland. They live in Dublin, then come down here to Mayo, live in Lewisburg, and come over to Burshule. She's interested in photography, sculpture, theatre, interior design, a whole lot of the art fields, particularly photography, and I've just found a marvelous find of her photography in my sister's home in New Mexico. So I'm looking forward to going through 50 boxes, which were moved out of her house yesterday and will be in my house on Wednesday in Stonington, Connecticut. Anyway, there's photographs I never even saw there's going to be there, so it's very exciting. There'll probably be another show one of these years here, anyway. And so I have some photographs too, if we have enough time, on my father. Peter, next one. So she's born in Greenwich, Connecticut, very conservative, American Republican family, and well-to-do. He founded a company that she invested in. Her own family was fairly well-to-do from Detroit, and she invested in her husband's company, a chemical company, and that all did quite well. So my mother was very privileged, as were her siblings, to live a life where she didn't actually need to work, but she became a professional person in all of the fields that she went into. But I could never get her to sell anything. You know, that was a great relief because there's no sales, no taxes, no anything else. But her view was always to me, my dear, that's your job. So, and I remember when Jack McGowan died in New York in 1973, and mother, she just goes into a furious rage of artistic activity, and within 2 days she'd done Sam Beckett, who, of course, Jackie McGowan was sort of copying in his stage work, and so I said, well, we're going to do a benefit for Jackie's daughter. She said, fine, I'll have these heads ready, and I said, well, what are you going to sell them? She said, yes. And I said, oh my God, yeah. So what are you going to sell them? $5,000 in 1973. I said, marvelous price. Knowing that no one would buy them at that price. So anyway, she lived in New York. She was a national junior tennis champion, age 18, but 17 and 18 she won the national junior tennis champions and doubles. She had this tremendous physical energy and acuity, both from playing tennis, good eyesight. She loved dancing, and she absolutely refused to go to university. There may well be, in due course, a second story behind that. She couldn't get into university, but I think she just didn't want to do it. And there was a very simple reason. A college like Vassar College, where ladies studied art, this was studying the history of art, and what Helen Hooker wanted to do was become an artist. And you don't learn art from art history. You have to go out and physically and do it in the sculpture and the painting and all of that. So in the summers afterwards, she would go to France and study there, go to Spain, Italy. She ran around Germany and spent 9 months in Russia. This is Stalin Russia in 1928 to 29. She got to know various people. She got arrested because she was taking photographs of and painting churches. She didn't know that churches were prisons. And she cared less, but until she got arrested. Anyway, and then she came home and said, oh, I want to go dancing. So she spent a year dancing in the Acropolis in Greece. quite really a character. And of course, in one of these sessions, she met my father in New York in 1933. They sort of fell in love in 1934, and you know, they basically planned then.
Sorry. It doesn't seem to want to move. Sorry. I'm not too sure what to do. I was just told to press this button. Sorry. Has he gone out, has he? There you go.
Okay.
Is that it? Am I right?
I guess so. So, I mean, this is her in 1930. She had just done this kind of sculpture, and for her 25th birthday in 1930. And she meets him, and so here's a photograph of them, and it's done at the time that she's doing his head. Just a backdrop to father and the Hooker family. He had lunch with the Hookers. So, you know, when I say my mother was a hooker, don't take it literally, but she was a hooker. And the Hookers had 4 daughters. So you can imagine what Mr. Hooker had to do for every Sunday lunch. You know, invite all the stray males around. And somehow my father got included into that group and came out to Greenwich, Connecticut. But most of the males in that category would have known that Mr. Hooker ran for the governor of New York State in 1920, had been the treasurer of the Bull Moose campaign for Teddy Roosevelt in 1912, and founded his own company. Do you think Ernie O'Malley knew anything about that? Do you think he cared? Anyway, but he liked a free lunch, so not that he was a freeloader, but free lunch sounded good, and someone said, you should go out to Greenwich, so he went out. So the Hooker family did not take very kindly to this immigrant, uneducated in the sense he had not completed a college, someone without a job, someone who was Catholic in a Protestant community, conservative, someone who somehow had been involved in a revolution. I'm sure grandfather didn't quite get that, but the whole idea of 1916 must have been anathema to him. And then a civil war? Are you kidding? My daughter should marry a general in a civil war when he was fighting the government? I mean, what's going on here, you know? So promptly after that dinner, the Hooker family was assembled and said Mr. O'Malley would never be invited back. But actually the real reason that there was a disagreement for that afternoon was that the issue of American Indians came in, Native Americans. My father had just spent 3 years in Taos, New Mexico, as well as a year in Mexico. And so he knew what the American Empire had done to the indigenous people very well. And, you know, in his view, there was a parallel to his own experience in Ireland. And so, not knowing really or caring who Mr. Hooker was, he stood up for, you know, the Native American cousin. And so I think it was that really trump card that just ensured that he would not be invited back. And my mother says in a poem I read recently that she said to her father after that, "Well, Father, you just can't do that. You know, I'm a girl. She didn't know. She stuttered, so she was put at one end of the table. But she saw this sort of confrontation between somebody talking back to her father and said, ooh, that's somebody I'm interested in. And of course, she then politely asked him if she could do his head. Great excuse. Put that down in your card for your grandchildren. Anyway, so they got married, they fell in love. De Valera's pension was coming through in 1932-34. He applied for it, he got it. It wasn't likely that he was going to have a real job. He went out to the Irish World's Fair in 1933 in Chicago, was out there for 6-8 months. and then came back, made the application. Frank Aiken told him, looks good, you know. I mean, they were friends and had this relationship. And I'm sure Fianna Fáil always wanted to get hold of Ernie O'Malley and put him on the deck of their generals and friends. They never quite did that, but I'll finish that later. Anyway, he said he'd have to go home to finish the application for the pension. They were falling in love, and he asked, I don't know how that came about getting married, and he said, let's not get married until you come to Ireland. And you know, here you think of a lady with that background, who's traveled broadly, and if you think of what your parents lived in Ireland in 1935, this was quite a jarring experience. Some of your sons and daughters in the last 30 years feel like they've been jarred by Irish society. Just think about 1935, when a Protestant woman comes into an Irish society, which is pretty Catholic. Anyway, so they come and they settle in Dublin. She's active in, she decorates her home beautifully because she just has this sense of color and dimension. And it's no wonder that she goes into theater, because she could just see, you know, what the proscenium should be done, or how a stage set should be created. And her own home was always a stage set. And so people came to her and said, could you do my home? Some of her friends, she did 3 libraries in Dublin, you know, Ballsbridge, the Pure Street Library, and the Howth Library. She just did gratis for her friends. Anyway, she was active there. She went to the Metropolitan School of Art, and on the weekend they continued into photography. And I'll be showing you some of the photographs. In fact, the rest of the show is really photographs. Ernie returned and he did his medical studies. Was he interested in medicine or not? I think he did it for show. Let the parents-in-law know that, you know, he was making an effort. Meantime, he was publishing his book On Another Man's Wound. And having published some books recently, you know, it's really very hard to go through the publishing process when you haven't done it before, as he had. And particularly, you know, one of my books, I don't know if you're up on that, called No Surrender Here. Well, that's a whole theme through the Civil War. So you can imagine Ernie O'Malley going to battle with an editor over every single word that an editor wants to cut out. So it was a very dissatisfying experience. And in fact, it ends up in a libel suit, and he loses for various other reasons we can talk about. During the weekends, a baby has come, and they're enjoying what little freedom they have. They're staffed up properly, as it was easy to do in Dublin in the 1930s. And on the weekends, their relaxation was to go photograph. And so they have a tremendous medieval sites, sculpture, buildings, and general descriptions of Ireland at that time. Some of them very haunting. When he was looking at the archaeological photographs at the time in 1938, and in fact many archaeological photographs, I read Ireland Archaeology, and it's improved greatly, in particular with aerial views, but traditional photographs were pretty damn dull. And so what he wanted to do was put the aesthetic into the archaeological. And you can see some of the photographs that he and my mother took. She also wants to capture not just the landscape, but the mood of the landscape. So, you know, what they did is, I mean, here's when she comes down. She's got this incredible camera, size camera, and which is a, you know, they had big negatives like this, and I have about 20,000 of these. Here's my father and my Uncle Kevin. I think that's a Leica. I'm not quite sure what this is. So they go on weekend trips to take a look at the photographs. And these are some of the photographs. He's particularly interested in sculptural detail. And you can see that's in Galway. I don't know the locations of all of these. I didn't research them for this lecture, but you can see what he's interested in terms of focus. So particularly sculpture is, and now, you know, with the 20,000 photographs, who took which photograph? I don't know. I put these in the 30s to my father. In the 60s, 70s, and 80s, when my mother was doing it without him, she came back and did a lot of these. But these are the earlier ones. And again, just the details of the waiting from all over Ireland. Yeah, and high crosses. So what they did is, Father, I have these little envelopes which Father writes down the locations of them. So again, when I have free time, hopefully soon, we will associate the print as well as the negative with each of these and then identify which of them are. It's a big task. Hopefully someone else will undertake it. Again, this is, that's from Cormac's Chapel in Cashel, Tipperary. I'm not sure where, I think that's from Clare. So, basically what happened was, from 38 after the libel suit occurred, Father was just discouraged. You know, the friends that he had fought with would not defend him in the libel suit. A balancing of power on their part, but you know, he felt betrayed by, and you know, the cause that he had fought for, and the comrades with whom he had fought, you know, betrayed him because they couldn't or wouldn't give evidence at the trial, and so he actually lost the trial for libel, and that meant financial disaster because I think he lost. The fee was £400, and his annual pension was $320. So, you know, that was a year's salary out the window. And also, I'm sure he must have been aware as a valiant warrior, you know, walking around Dublin. I'm not saying that there was snickering, but I mean, he just would have felt terrible about what had happened. So he had his interest in the arts and in photography, so he said, let's just move west. And he is from Castlebar, and my cousin Luke Kavanagh is here. Luke, and Luke was born on the land where my father's grandfather was born. So, and he was raised in Castlebar. And so they felt, you know, this is a nice way to get away from Dublin and its society and all of the other elements. And particularly if you go into the arts like he was going to do on photography. So what they did down in Mayo, they rented in Burshul and then came out to, in Louisburg, and then came out to Burshul Lodge. They farmed Burshul Lodge during the war, and you'll see some photographs of that. Ernie would sail by himself quite recklessly. He'd land on the mud on the various places and the narrow creeks going out to Clare Island. He recorded folklore in the winter of 1940, and Peter Maloney and I are working on that with others who helped interpret his horrible handwriting. He researched books on Mayo and Connaught and the history of Connaught, and never came to fruition. I mean, I wrote a book some years ago called Broken Landscapes, which was my father's correspondence from 1924 to 1957. And my explanation for the title is simply that everything that my poor father touched disintegrated, failed. He just never really accomplished the same thing. I mean, yes, he got the book out, but it was sued over. He never published his second book. He was going to do poetry, that didn't come out. You know, he got married and that failed. He had a terrible health, and, that went downhill. My brother and sister were kidnapped by my mother, so that didn't work out too well. I was sent from farm to farm so that I wouldn't be kidnapped. That didn't work out too well. I think it worked out fine.
Yeah, that's grand.
I didn't have to do too much homework. But anyway, it was a challenge for him in terms of living. Anyway, so they continued to take photographs. And some of you might have seen did a book a couple of years called Western Ways. And many of the photographs that you'll see here are included in that book. So this is really covering 44. By 45, they were fed up with the West. Mother had 3 children. They wanted to get better education for them, and they went back to Dublin. They kept the house, which wasn't sold till 1981. So when they moved down here, Father rented Old Head Lodge, which is down near the water. The water would be further down here. A nice little place. And they had that for the summer of 1938. And while they were there, Mother was active photographing around, and you can see Father also with a camera. And these were all in the Lewisburg area. They were very detailed photographs. And again, I haven't researched them to get all the proper names, but I will one of these days. The tombs, megalithic, and others that they covered. I think that's a well. The ports, which was sort of going into the folklore area, and you can see some other. So here's a beautiful one. Again, I'm not sure you can see the way the rocks are mounted up. I don't have the one of the Clapper Bridge, which was really very beautiful. It was in that other book. Don't know where this castle is in Connemara. It's listed as Galway. Does anyone know? Anyway.
It's outside Doonavis, near Port
Oh, it's not Connemara. Port
I know more.
Wow. I mean, isn't that something? Just looking at that whole situation. I mean, it's a perfect, it's like Cashel, really, isn't it? Yeah. And you can see all of the towers and embellishments with the road up, which is protected. Portlaoise, okay. So one of the things that Father was always concerned with was images being taken of him. I mean, this is a little bit of a hang-up from, the Tanmore, where he just didn't want to be photographed. And he went with that, and you can see he didn't face the camera. She had to spy on him in order to get a photograph. And there was one of him when he was preparing his camera, and you could see. So here he is again. I'm pretty sure this is not too far from here. The 2 characters up here, and yep. And this one is again. It may be I think it's a different one, but it's the same. It's in the Lewisburg, Westport area. And of course, I mean, this is a beautiful one right underneath. This would be in Mersk, I guess, with the stoops and the cottages. And there's another photograph I have which has the round stones in the field, but I don't think I have it here. So one of the they lived right close to Corramore, which is, I mean, it's one peninsula around Old Head from where they were living. And one of the things that they had back then was the races at Corramore. I think they've just been reinstituted about 3 or 4 years ago. And they hold them in August now. I don't know, this could have been August or September. But we actually have enough photographs so you can see the race all the way through, and I'll show you some of them. And of course, there's Clare Island sitting out in the background. And the race is going along. And the crowd's watching the race. And with the old car here, there's quite a number of people watching. And again, this is probably, you can see the posts for the race and the race horse there that they run down. And it's done at low tide, so you can be on the strand. And I guess everything is over and they're going away. I should be honestly say that I don't know how to reverse a slide, but I don't want to be accused of falsely. Those who people in the audience who know where Clare Island is know that that should be reversed. But anyway, I just don't know how to do that. But anyway, this is another scene. And here we are preparing, look at the old horse, and the horse is coming up. And that would be the Old Head Hotel on the Old Head Hill on the other side of Carramore. Anyway, and again, they would use that cottage as their daily exercise to go out and take photographs. I think the photographs they only had one child at the time. Don't think they had any help. They just moved down here to take care of themselves. I love this photograph of Dula before the new road was built. And it has that deep, abiding doom, in it. And it's really a classic photograph. And of course, that was a terrible road with historical consequences. We were looking at some of the folklore this afternoon, which was about that field. Anyway, well, as you saw from Carramore, it wasn't too far to go out to Clare Island. And Father would go out there, loved going out there. And we used to sail out there from Burrishoole later. But here's a photograph she took of the Gallagher family and two other children. And when I published this, we didn't actually know the names of the people, and people read the names and all wrote in and sort of said, "Oh, it's the Gallaghers." So now we actually, with some feedback, know the Gallaghers' names. And I have several other detailed photographs of the lobster fisherman himself. And here's the cover of the book. I mean, she does not want to be photographed. So we were able, as a result of the book also, we were able to identify all of these people. I think, is it O'Grady is the hotel? So this is her father. Anyway, we identified them, and it was fun having correspondence. They were delighted to have, it was 1938 photographs of themselves. And this is a grand photograph when it's blown up. And we had an exhibit up at the the National Library Museum in 2019, as well as the Gallery of Photography in Temple Bar, and that was blown up to a great extent. So it was beautiful. And she had, one of the problems, you can see some of these photographs are very grainy. That's simply because I don't know how to do the mechanics. But some of these are very good photographs. And on that day that they were out, there was a regatta, and I have enough photographs that, again, you can see the old hookers going around the point. So this is the point right in front of the Granuaile Castle, and you can see photographs of them on the other side watching what's happening, and then they go out further and around this way. So basically then, I mean, this is sort of an intermission between looking from the north, so the south side to the north, and they decide to move across the bay when they found this house in Burrishoole. So when Burrishoole, again, they knew they were looking for a house. The first house they got was just a rental for the summer, and they found a Burshue Lodge, which was unoccupied at the time, and they rented it from October or November 1938. And I think they acquired part of it in 42, 43, 44, and then more of it later as they wanted to farm the lands. And what they what they did is, mother was this industrious American who had all this energy and said, well, if we're going to have a farm, we're going to be self-sufficient. And this fit in with De Valera's plan of self-sufficiency for Ireland. And they had just about everything except sugar. Well, sugar came from, wasn't there a plant in Tuam that made sugar and one in Tipperary? So at least it was made in Ireland. Tea had to be imported. And she renovated the farm sheds and built extensively. She leased more lands. She employed 46 local workers. She installed a wind charger. So certainly for about a year we had electricity. It fell down in a storm and we never had electricity again. She dug wells for better supply. And she insisted, again, she used to quote her father. So if you're going to do something, you do it well. And we're going to have the first tubercular-free herd west of the Shannon. That was an objective, and I think you had to build stalls in a certain style. So she got the approval and went ahead and did it. This was Burshue. This was built in about 1901, I think, or about that time by Anketel Jones, who was the then owner of the property. And there's a second view with some gardens. Yeah, so here's that area. Down here is a glass house and some gardens. And out on this side is an old castle from, I don't know what century, but 15th or 16th century. It's on the Italian maps of the 16th century. And it and the Murray, the castle, which Martin Murray had, which is Abbeyville, a guest house from those old days, were two castles. And these were deep draft piers. They had piers going out. And of course, when Newport was built 300 years ago, as you can see on a daily basis, there is no deep draft here. But in Burshue there was. So this is part of the farm. They went about seriously employing people, getting the farm, the hay and the wheat, getting it in for the winter. And this was part of the land that they had. I presume that's someone building the little hay, there must be a technical word for the small one, and then you build it up and you flush it and get bigger and bigger, and you finally get a haystack. Yeah, here's the bigger ones, the small ones, the bigger ones. And we had in here, this is a farmhouse. Through that door you would have the hay, you would pull the haystack onto your trolley with a rope and then take it back into, this would be the barn where you keep the hay. And this is the entrance to Burshue. And so they rented another field which overlooks the Abbey, and they use this for we have two photographs of this, one for the wheat and the other for potatoes. You know what these are? I don't know the technical name, but you'd put your potatoes into them in sacks, and then you would smooth this off with mud and preserve it so that the rats couldn't get in to eat it. And there's another photograph, and this is the house down there. So when you eat it, you break this open and you take the stuff and you bring it back to the house. And we store this in, it was an earth, the floor was earth in a shed. So we'd put these on the floor, keep them damp and moist and like that. So this is the old Murray place, and right down in here was the other castle from the 15th century. And there was the thrashing and building of all of that stuff. that you need. These were,
Sorry.
can you go back one? So Mother designed these with a designer, but she wanted to have a graciousness and yet very practical. These were open air, and you put your turf in there. The wind would blow through it, but not the rain, so you could keep it air during the winter. Father was did research. I mean, Father knew nothing about farming. His family had not been a farmer until his grandfather before him. But so during the war, I still have all of these beekeeping pamphlets that were issued by the Department of Agriculture. And, you know, Father, in a very mechanical way, just as he studied the British military armaments during the Tan War, he would have figured out how to keep bees according to the schedule on what to do. So I remember him well going out, and we had 3 or 4 of these bees, and so we didn't need the sugar because we had the honey. Now, there was some great help around on the farm. Totally unnamed, of course, but it is not me. I was not a glimmer in the eye by this point. I might have been, you know. They said, well, let's keep trying. So my older brother is Cathal. Some of you might have seen him in his valiant effort here. But this next photograph is really fun.
Oh,
so here's the dog attached to the lamb. Anyway, and he's having a great job trying to do it. And so Father goes out. This is a lug sail, a heavy wooden boat, goes out sailing by himself. You can see he's on the back of someone to get in there. And I mean, I was reading out in New Mexico 2 weeks ago, memories of my sister. And she remembered when we had a bigger boat. It was a two-ton boat, St. Brendan. And she remembers that the boom knocking Father overboard with 3 kids, you know. And she said, you know, Cathal pushed the rudder, I guess, and did a U-turn. God knows how Father, I mean, you get wet. Look at his clothes on. You get wet by Roskilling and try to climb into a 2-ton boat, which would be much higher than that. Didn't have the steps, which nice people have today. So God knows how Eitan was describing, they pulled and somehow they got in. And they didn't go aground, they just kept going around. Anyway, so here's Cathal at an earlier stage. So near Burshul are these 2 standing stones that we have now identified. And funny enough, I went to the National Museum to find out where are these standing stones. And they went out and said, well, there's somewhere in Mayo. I said, yeah, okay. I mean in Connaught. Okay, well, where? Somewhere in Mayo. Somewhere near Newport. And then someone said, well, I don't know, they're on the townland of Burshul. I said, this is terribly embarrassing. I mean, why can't I remember where these are? But you can see them from the Mulranny Road coming toward Newport by Moran's, well, what used to be Moran Shop in the Moran, our Dorada School. And if you look up on the right-hand side, you'll see these 2 still erect there. So yesterday there was Rams Fair here in Newport. I missed it by an hour, but you could smell that I had been here as I walked up. And of course, we're in these buildings here now, which have been renovated. This would be 1939. I guess that would be Dominic Kelly's Divine's Hotel was there. And this was the old wastegate. where you would get things weighed. And we have a second one of a sheep farm a couple of years later, again taken by my mother in the 70s.
Oh, you're back to front.
Yeah, well, yeah. So another place close to my parents' heart was Achill, which is just out the road, as you know. And so here's, you know, a fishing boat. I mean, that's in pretty close to the rock, so I don't know what they're doing. Well, I doubt if there were lobster pots there. Fair Island in the background. And, you know, she was able to capture, you know, the general scope and atmosphere of the turf and the, you know, the ladies and their dress of the period. Again, you can see how these are all way down off the road, so they're protected as the wind blows across. John, do you know where that, what place that is? Anyway, I was struck when I looked at this because I would have gone out, you know, 20 years ago to Achill, and when I saw this photograph, I said, goodness, isn't this deja vu? But here we are, 1939, a modern house built on Achill, and they're, you know, not dissimilar from what was, what has been built more recently. And that would be, She Bloom, is it? Yeah, right. So again, that mother was interested in Western Wales. I have a whole series of 10 photographs of cottages. She was very interested in what was happening with them, and particularly we'll see some details as to how these are stones which hang down so that the wind doesn't blow off. Here's some more details of how they're. This is wood, and then these are the rope. And again, here's on the stone. Another area of the west of Ireland, of course, is bog. And Mother took sumptuous and numerous elements of bog. I didn't know what this was for a long time, but with a magnifying glass, it is a person who's standing ready to do something. Another thing that was interesting is this little line here. It looks like a white line, and in fact is the cusp of the water edge underneath. You know, so the water seeps down here, and there's an edge. It's not a froth from rain or something like that. It's actually the cusp as it runs along, and there's another one there. She had great photographs. Some are in that book that we did for the museum on the Bog of Allen turf competition and all the things. Again, here as you can see the deeper, and you can see the small going into the big and the bigger. I love this one. I mean, it's just so luscious. And when it's, we had this on a full wall like that, and very, very dark, you can see the cut of the loy as it goes down. And of course, the top has been cut off, and out of this, there's only 1, 2, 3, 4 layers left. I call this beached whales, but in fact it's curds, you know, and they're held down. Not quite sure what part. It could be Achill, or anywhere. You can see this sea in the background. And she had a whole series of these that I didn't use, with people carrying the curd, 2 people walking down the beach, turning them over. This is the one I referred to earlier, which these now, all of this is totally overgrown, so you can't see it. Well, you know, but I love the contrast. Again, it's near Mersk, with Crowpatrick and Mersk village up in here, and these would, I'm sure you could go out and still unearth them underneath the bush and brush that has been grown up around them. I think I showed you that before. Anyway, so what happened, you know, after 45, they never got tired of the West. They kept coming back to the West. The question is whether you wanted to live and farm in the West, or whether you could have a more exciting personal life in Dublin. Mother, in 1943, had joined the Irish Exhibition of Living Arts. She was one of these sort of modernists who, along with Mamie Jellett and Anne Yates and Louis LeBrocqui and Evie Hone, some of them were rejected by the more conservative group called the Royal Hibernian Academy. And so they set up this annual exhibition of living artists. And she was included for 5 years with her sculpture and that. And she also, when she got back to Dublin in spring of '44, she decided to found an Irish theatre. And it was, she founded the Players Theatre on the grounds that an actor or actress should be paid a reasonable salary. A reasonable salary in 1945 was £1 a day. And what she had found was that a lot of the actors were having to take a second job because they were getting paid less than £1 a day. So the £1 a day was enough to for a family, man or woman, to survive and live on. She also became active as an interior decorator, I mentioned before. And throughout this period, as my father started to buy some art, she bought her art. And now, when she gave her gift to the Irish American Cultural Institute in 1979, she had 400 items of art. They are now, 600, now reduced to 400. They've been exhibited in Castlebar in 1992 and other times. They've been at the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and they're now on display down in the Limerick University. There were marriage tensions coming out. Mother sort of took off from Dublin and went to, again, you know, marriage tensions is one. Who's taking care of the babies and all that? That, you know, in the 40s, it was no great difficulty for middle-class people because you were able to have your help. You weren't rich. It was just sufficient middle class was able to do that. And that was de rigueur. So she went off to London, and great success in London. And again, I found all of these files in New Mexico 2 weeks ago. Things got a little confusing when we got tuberculosis, and so we were taken out of school and confined to bed, and, you know, things like that. Tensions continued. She sort of basically left the family home in 1948 and returned to America in 1950 and divorced my father. So I thought I'd just give you a little preview of the Malley family, because I didn't really mention them, but they happen to be at the end of this series, so I thought I'd let you see them. Marion Kearney from Roscommon, Luke Malley from born in Ballyglass, worked in Castlebar, and then went up to Dublin. My aunt, Sweetie, Marion Malley, became, and you know, the Malley family is quite typical of many of your families, I presume, which is they didn't all live here. Economics were such that they went abroad. So Marion became a nurse here in Hollow Street and then went to London to work. Paddy is one of the few boys who actually stayed in Dublin, and the way that was done was Luke Malley was in the Congested District Board, and the family story is he went to the Hibernian Bank, in which the Congested District Board had an account, and he said, "Do you want to keep your account?" So Paddy went to work for them. And I mean, Patty's story, you know, again, you perhaps have friends whose children have gone into banking and they have gone around here and their Citibank, you toured here and there. You know what Patty did? He said, I like golf. I like living in Clontarf. I'm not going to move. So when, I mean, he was never promoted significantly because, you know, you have a learning experience when you go from bank to bank around the countryside. So when I went, I remember seeing Paddy in the early 60s. He was a teller. Now, I always tell the good side of being a teller. It's very important to know your clients. And so Paddy just had this good relationship with his clients because they'd come in and chat and see him. Anyway, that was Paddy, a stubborn man. A Malay trait, no doubt. Here's my Uncle Kevin. He managed to stay in Ireland. His brother Cecil couldn't pass the Irish exams because, you know, one of the things where they were Republicans and there was prejudices. And Brendan couldn't pass the Irish exams, so they both went to London. These both girls were not good in the Irish, and they went off to London too. My Aunt Kathleen and again, Sweetie. So this is the book I brought out in 2015, Remembering Mayo Through the Eyes of Helen Hooker and Ernie O'Malley. So I think that's the end of it. So anyway, if you have any questions, let me know.
You want this one?
Hmm?
You want that one?
No.
No. Or that one?